whilst we can get kind of sucked into the personalities, it's hard not to, especially on a day like today. I think that what we're seeing here is the electoral kind of tectonic plates continue to shift.
Amongst progressives in particular, there is such a palpable sense of caution and cowardice in relation to saying anything positive about this. You can really feel that they don't know what to say, they feel uncomfortable with what's happening.
The kind of periodic panics that establishments have about free speech and democracy, this is just the kind of digitized 21st century version of it.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers. Thrilled as ever to be joined in the studio by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And we're joined down the line by an extra special guest, Spike's chief political commentator and host of the Brendan O'Neill Show, Brendan O'Neill. Welcome, Brendan.
Hi, how's it going?
Before we get into the topics, Tom, do you want to let people know about a special offer and an exciting event?
Absolutely. So it's January sale time on Spiked. So if you're not one of the people who has signed up to become a Spike supporter, giving you unlimited access to the website, as well as all kinds of other perks, now is the time to do it. Until the end of January, you can become a Spike supporter for £1 a month for 3 months, then goes up to £5 a month, but you can quit at any time. It's a fantastic offer. You'll get access to the website, as I say. You get access to the weekly extra pod that we do every single week exclusively for supporters. And we've also got loads of very exciting things to announce, including lots more events in the near future. So now is definitely the time to sign up. Go to spiked-online.com/support in order to avail yourself of that offer. And also, as Fraser says, there's a very exciting event coming up, organised by our friends at the Free Speech Union. It's called In Defence of Trial by Jury. It's taking place on Thursday, the 29th of January at Inner Temple in London. And if you're a Spike supporter, you get a discount for your ticket. So to find out more, go over to the Free Speech Union website. You can book your tickets there. Also, if you're a Free Speech Union member, as I'm sure many of you are, you can get a discount there as well. So sign up to become a Spike supporter for £1 a month for 3 months if you're not signed up already. And do go and check out that very interesting discussion, which our friends at the FSU are going to be holding at the end of the month.
Thank you, Tom. And coming up on this show, we'll be discussing the Robert Jenrick defection to reform, the Iranian uprisings, and Starmer's ban on X. Robert Jenrick has defected from the Conservative Party to reform. The former Shadow Justice Secretary made it official in the afternoon that we're speaking. He was kind of outed earlier by Kemi Badenoch, who sacked him, saying she had clear, incontrovertible evidence of his disloyalty. He was officially sacked from his post as Shadow Justice Secretary, booted out from the party. Tom, there's been quite a lot of defections to reform from the Conservatives in particular, but this one is probably the most seismic so far, surely.
No, absolutely. And there is often a lot of kind of personal psychodrama which goes on in Westminster, but rarely has it actually come with significant political consequence. I think Robert Jenrick's defection to reform definitely qualifies as that. The way in which it's unfurled over the course of the day in which we're recording this, as you say, Kemi Badenoch trying to get ahead of this story by saying that she had this irrefutable evidence. It seems like a kind of draft resignation speech was just left lying around, which is slightly strange, but nevertheless, this was a prompt to kick him out of not just the shadow cabinet, but the party itself. There was then just a wall of silence from Team Jenrick for many hours, and a lot of uncertainty going into the press conference that has just taken place at 4:30 p.m. today in Westminster about what was going to happen, what was actually going to be announced. Of course, Nigel Farage unveiled Jenrick as the latest and most significant defection. What this all means will become clear in time, but there's a couple of things. First and foremost, it's pretty clear that where it comes to Robert Jenrick himself, if much of the reporting is to be believed, that this is a kind of combination of, as it always is with politicians, with personal ambition and political conviction to a certain extent. Someone who has clearly been on a bit of a journey, politically speaking, shall we say. There are questions about how genuine that is, not least from Nigel Farage, as of about 6 months ago, who referred to him as a fraud. But nevertheless, that's water under the bridge now, it seems. Jenrick's defection, I think, is less significant in terms of, is he suddenly going to bring in floods of new voters to reform? He's someone who people in Westminster pay a lot of attention to. I think the kind of base of right-wing activism and support, both for Reform and the Conservative Party, certainly have a lot of time for him. But I think it's particularly significant insofar as Reform's move to become the party of the centre-right in this country. I doubt this will be the last person from that more kind of Jenrickite faction to move over to Reform. And I think a lot of the members in the Conservative Party who were clinging on because they wanted a Conservative Party more in his image will start to move in that direction as well. So whilst Kemi Badenoch might have been able to begin the day looking almost quite strong, quite decisive, I think it's inevitable that this has diminished her party by the close of the day. So it's, as I say, even though people might have got a bit tired of many defections and backstabbing and psychodrama and whatever, this is something that has a lot more consequence, I think, and we'll see what form that takes in the weeks and months ahead.
And Brendan, I mean, people had been starting to talk recently about maybe a bit of a Kemi bounce. You know, the Conservatives have been second in the polls as opposed to third or fourth, you know, as they've been in recent months. But I think, as you've written in your piece this week, it really suggests that reform actually is the only game in town, or it's certainly where, you know, the direction of travel is going. Any talk of peak reform seems to have been wildly premature.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think the Jenrick defection is a massive event. And I'm not saying that because I think Jenrick is a brilliant politician. I don't think he is particularly. He's pretty good on YouTube, and I follow him on Instagram, and he does all these kind of, you know, slightly weird videos, drinking a pint of beer and going to the country pub and, you know, chasing crime and all the other things. But he seems to have a pretty good digital following now. I think part of it is he's driven by a sense of not being able to succeed within the Tory party. So I do think there's a strong element of personal ambition, because his star has faded within the Conservative Party massively. And if you look at the speech that he did at the Conservative Party conference at the end of last year, it really didn't land. I mean, who remembers it? Nobody. And I'm pretty sure he expected that to be his big speech that would push him further up the ranks of, you know, the kind of the public knowing who he is, but it didn't really work. Whereas Kemi Badenoch's speech at the Tory party conference slightly transformed her fortunes, and then there was the Kemi bounce, and she's been doing better in the House of Commons. So I think part of the drive for Jenrick is that he did want a larger piece of someone's pie, and he felt he had to go to reform. Having said that, this is just such a massive coup for Nigel Farage and Reform UK. I mean, they are just stealing big hitting Tories left and right. And I think what it really speaks to is the hollowing out of the Tory party. They are just incapable of withstanding the pressure from reform. They're incapable of facing down the threat that reform poses. They can't really get their act together in a structural way, however well Kemi might do on certain days. I just think structurally, politically, historically, the Tory party is a busted flush. And this is one of the most successful parties in the democratic era, and it really can't hold itself together anymore. And I think that's what the defection speaks to. And as you say, Fraser, it also shows that reform is a colossus of British politics. It's the only game in town right now. Every other party is being forced to define itself in relation to reform, whether they define themselves as being similar to reform or distinct from reform. It really is the only kind of game going on. So this is a historic event, and I think it demonstrates that there is a massive thirst for change in this country, and Robert Jenrick has clocked that.
Tom, do you think there is a risk, on the other hand, of reform potentially being seen as a place for, you know, just disaffected Tories? I think I wouldn't put Robert Jenrick in this camp because clearly he is somewhat of a rising star. But if you look at certain defections like Nadine Dorries, for instance, or, you know, Nadeem Zahawi comes with a lot of experience, but also a lot of baggage with investigations into his tax affairs and things like that. Could that be a potential problem for Farage? That actually, that it might not be the change that people want?
Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting question, because there is this kind of core friction at the heart of the reform project, which is it to be a vehicle which is basically to say we're going to be a proper version of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, then there is a kind of clear logic to bringing over people, particularly ones like Robert Jenrick, who, whether or not people completely buy his Damascene conversion or not, is certainly moved in a reform-esque direction, even kind of outflanking them and kind of engaging in a level of vice signalling on certain issues that even Nigel Farage wouldn't, I think it's fair to say. Or is it trying to come up with something which tries to create a bit more of a new formula, which you've seen sometimes in their, again, sort of flirtations with nationalisation, or with things like their policy on the 2-child benefit cap, where they want to look like a slightly different proposition to try and kind of bring in many of those kind of red wall voters who aren't necessarily kind of paid up with what might traditionally have been seen as Tory economics. So there's a kind of mix of things going on here, and also just generally speaking, wanting something new, something fresh, something which feels like a blast against a clapped out political establishment. So I suppose that tension is there, but at the same time, I think the broader trend lines there are absolutely set. Whether or not reform is sort of peaking has become a discussion point in recent days, particularly because of a couple of polls which have seen their numbers drop a little bit as the Tories seem to have bounced back to a certain extent. But at the same time, to go back to a point that Brendan made, the key question of British politics now is: are you with reform or are you not?
Yeah.
And therefore, that will maintain a level of momentum and centrality to our political discussion that no other party could really wish, could hope to actually capture. And I think what's really key here, and Brendan mentioned it in his piece on Spike today, which is that whether you're talking about reform's fortunes and the way in which those have skyrocketed since the last election, certainly, or if you're talking about the way in which Robert Jenrick has moved, politically speaking, the key thread here is the fact that public opinion has either pushed them to prominence or pushed them in that direction to a certain extent. Ever since Brexit, it has been clear that the two-party system did not reflect the views of the electorate, that it no longer captured the divides in society, and that because of the way that these issues fell, it fell to the kind of right of politics to kind of get its act together in order to try and reshape itself around that Brexit vote, that Brexit coalition. So whilst we can get kind of sucked into the personalities, it's hard not to, especially on a day like today. I think that what we're seeing here is that the electoral kind of tectonic plates continue to shift.
Yeah.
And the fortunes of the Reform Party and the way in which people within politics have moved and are changing and how they're positioning themselves is very much in response to where the electorate has kind of dragged politics in a fascinating fashion over the course of the past 10 years now.
And Brendan, I feel like I've probably made this point a million times on the podcast, but we sometimes do get a little bit too used to the fact that reform is, just topping the polls constantly, poll after poll, as if it isn't a once in a century historic shift. You have to go back to the Labour Party displacing the Liberal Party for something as massive as this in our British politics. Even the famous Gang of Four were not able to disrupt left-wing politics in the way that they had hoped. It is just historic.
Yeah, completely historic. I actually think about that quite a lot because, Farage has been a fixture on British politics for quite some time. He had the UKIP party and he had the Brexit party, and he played a huge role in getting the Brexit referendum. So he's been around for a long, long time. But the Reform Party hasn't been around for that long. And it is now the largest party going in terms of the polls and popularity and people wanting it to do better and some people wanting it to get into power. This is historic. This country has been dominated by two parties, Labour and the Conservatives, for the past 100 plus years. One or the other has been in power, give or take a few blips here and there, like when the Lib Dems got in briefly and all that kind of nonsense. But basically, those two parties have run things for most of the modern era. And that is changing. And the dislodging of that is absolutely a huge historical story for this country. And I completely agree with Tom that the driving force behind all of this is people's thirst for change. And I do think it's worth Reform bearing that in mind. I think Reform's got some good politicians, some good activists. I think they could do pretty well. But they do have to bear in mind that their fortunes are entirely underpinned by ordinary people feeling exhausted with the old party system and wanting something different. And it does come out of Brexit. It comes out of the post-Brexit experience when the establishment tried to overthrow the votes of 17.4 million people. It comes from the clothed response of the elite to people's concerns about broken borders, mass immigration, crime, other issues that people are concerned about, but the establishment thinks is not important. All of that experience that ordinary people have had for a long time, they've experienced it very patiently. They kind of bided their time, they've bit their tongues, they've waited, and they've brought about this radical historic change, which is the creation of a new political party force that could potentially upset politics in this country. So I think it's pretty exciting. You don't have to be a fully signed up Reform fanboy or fangirl to find it quite exciting that ordinary people have been able to shift the political levers in such a dramatic way, and that's really good.
To dwell on the Conservative Party for one moment, because of course this is what we've witnessed over the course of the past 10 years is the party duopoly breaking down, and we've seen that on the Labour side certainly, but just on the Conservatives, because people forget this is, as Brendan said earlier, the most successful political party in the democratic world historically. This is a party that we now consider as kind of quite kind of old hat and aloof and so on, but in the mid 1950s reported to have 3 million members. It had real roots in society, whether it's by the church or various other, or the conservative associations and so on and so forth. This was a hugely historically significant political force, and the fact that it's now just being kind of blown into the near distance is absolutely fascinating. Just shows how much is to play for in these much more volatile, populist, and infinitely more interesting times that we've arrived in.
As you all know, here at Spiked, we will always defend your right to free speech. But unfortunately, as long as Britain has the Online Safety Act, there's a hell of a lot on the internet that's being hidden from you right now. But what if I told you there's an easy, simple way to beat the UK's censors? The good news is, thanks to our partners, Private Internet Access, or PIA for short, you can access tons of the content that the government doesn't want you to. PIA is the VPN I use and trust whenever I'm accessing the internet. A VPN, or virtual private network, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. Instead of giving away your personal information and location to the world, PIA lets you change your IP address to one of 91 countries. This means you can gain access to websites and services that are only available in those locations. And it's not just that. Did you know that streaming services like Netflix and Prime have huge catalogues of content, but you can only access a fraction of it from your own country? Using PIA to change your location opens up a whole new world of streaming. Paying for Netflix without using PIA is a bit like paying for front row seats at the cinema, but being forced to sit in the hallway. PIA is also essential for keeping yourself safe online. It protects you from the prying eyes of hackers, internet service providers, and anyone else with an unhealthy interest in your personal information or online activity. Personally, I would never go online without using it again. And because PIA is available for all platforms, I never need to worry about my safety or privacy. It works on Windows, Apple Macs, iPhones, Androids, and more. Even better, you only need one subscription to protect yourself across all the devices you own. Sign up now to the world's most transparent VPN provider and take advantage of our special offer. Spike's viewers and listeners can get 86% off a subscription to Private Internet Access. That's just £1.67 a month. And you also get an extra 4 months thrown in completely for free. To take advantage of this incredible deal, just go to piavpn.com/spiked. That's piavpn.com/spiked. Signing up is totally risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. You will not regret it. Sign up now at piavpn.com/spiked. So we are in the third week of the protests in Iran, protests that have spread all across the country, protests that are leading people to be killed en masse by the repressive Iranian regime. I should say to anyone watching this, things may be radically different by the time you're watching. There hasn't yet been an intervention by the United States, although it has been somewhat threatened and there have been some military maneuvers cited. But we're talking from a standpoint where what is happening is purely a popular national local uprising against the ayatollahs. And Tom, I think it's hard to see this as anything other than unbelievably inspiring.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're right to put that caveat at the beginning of it, because of the fact that the two, I suppose, developments of this week, one of which is whether or not a locked and loaded Donald Trump is going to follow through on his threats in any way, shape or form. That might change by the time people see this. The other one is that the crackdown is well and truly underway.
Yeah.
So the very inspiring scenes that we all saw on our social media feeds over the course of the past couple of weeks has given way to kind of silence. The internet blackout that was imposed at the end of last week, essentially the regime and its thugs gunning down protesters under that cover of digital darkness. And now we've just got kind of tentative estimates of how many people might have been killed. These range from anywhere from 2,000 or 3,000 to as many as 12,000, but people who look at this quite closely seem like the upper end of the estimate is entirely likely. So what I think we're seeing here is this is the true face of the Islamic Republic. This is the true face of the the regime of the ayatollahs, despite all of the excuse making and useful idiocy in terms of the discussion, particularly in the West, of this Islamist barbaric regime. This is what they do when people don't toe the line. But the fact that, from what we can tell, the Iranians do continue to fight on just shows the tremendous courage that there is, but also the kind of radicalism that I think has been bred of sheer desperation.
Yeah.
This started, of course, amid a tanking economy, runaway inflation, a political establishment in Iran who couldn't even keep the water running out of the taps. They were so inept and corrupt, but has really propelled people to basically call for the end of the entire regime, chanting death to the dictator, even a bit of kind of Shah nostalgia creeping in, as we were talking about on the podcast last week, because people are desperate for, at the very least, a freer and more prosperous time. So a lot remains to be seen, but you can't help but continue to be inspired by the courage it has taken for them to fight on for this long, but also sat with a sense of dread as we wait to find out just how brutal the crackdown has been that seems to have begun in earnest.
Yeah. Brendan, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's incredibly inspiring, pretty scary to watch it as well, because we know awful things are happening. That's what tends to happen in revolutionary moments. You know, there are inspiring acts of bravery amongst the people and then vicious clampdowns from the authorities. And that's certainly happening here. I think it's hard to know where this is going to go next. It's hard to know how it's going to play out. We all wanted to end with the collapse of the Islamic Republic. That would be great. But regardless of how it pans out, there's no denying how historic this is, because what's really different this time around is the constituencies that have taken to the streets. So we've seen lots of protests over recent years. We've seen student protests, we've seen women protesting, we've seen young people in Iran protesting, the middle classes protesting because they want a freer life. And of course, we at Spiked supported all of those protests. We don't care where they're coming from. They were all very positive. This one has got all of those constituencies, but also the market stall holders and the old men who work in the bazaars and the people who have felt the pinch of the collapsing Iranian currency. So, those are the kind of people who supported the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Those are the kind of ordinary people, the masses, who made up that revolutionary moment. Many of them because they thought it would transform the country for the better and didn't quite expect it to end in the theocracy that it did. But that constituency is now back out on the street fighting against the theocracy. So this is a very historic moment. And I find the response in the West so baffling and horrifying, because amongst progressives in particular, there is such a palpable sense of caution and cowardice in relation to saying anything positive about this. You can really feel that they don't know what to say. They feel uncomfortable with what's happening. They're worried that, the axis of resistance will collapse if the Islamic Republic collapses. There is a palpable reluctance amongst certain people in the West to say anything positive about this. And I think that tells us a really important story about how messed up our societies are, as well as how messed up the Iranian society currently is.
And Tom, the Iranian theocracy hasn't just been menacing its own people. This is a problem internationally. They've been menacing people across the Middle East in particular.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's exactly right. I wrote a piece about this week, so I would say that, I suppose. But this is something which makes this moment so important, not just for Iran, not just for the region, but for the world. Because it's no overstatement to say that the Iranian Revolution of 79 was really such a fundamental kind of historic marker in the rise of Islamist barbarism, not just in Iran and its near abroad, but across the world. You could talk about the direct sponsorship of terror by the Iranian regime. There's the axis of resistance that we've already touched upon. 1982, the IRGC going to set up Hezbollah in southern Lebanon to menace the Jewish state, which has been doing ever since. The courting of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, whose kind of full-blown genocidal intentions were made abundantly clear on October the 7th. The Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, all of these groups working at the direction of the Iranian regime, its funding and training and so on and so forth. That axis, of course, has been pretty fundamentally weakened, not just by Israeli and American bombs over the course of the Gaza war, but also the collapse of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which has kind of, hosted and trained a lot of these militants. But also beyond that, the Iranian Revolution was incredibly symbolic for Islamist scumbags the world over. Even in the early days, there was a lot of kind of Sunni Islamists who took a lot of inspiration from it. And actually even a lot of the kind of Saudi-backed Wahhabi fundamentalism that was pumped out by the Saudi regime over the course of recent decades was very much kind of in response to the sense that the Ayatollah was trying to claim leadership over this new Islamic vanguard, and that was their attempt to kind of counter it in their own way. And even something like the Satanic Verses controversy, the fatwa, the horrific and outrageous way in which Khomeini kind of wanted to extend his writ to the entire world, calling on Muslims to murder Salman Rushdie, and one of them almost getting very close a couple of years ago. The rise of kind of anti-blasphemy violence across the West, it's inconceivable that it would be on the level that it is now, where this despicable regime. So if the Islamic Republic is to fall at the hands of the Iranian people, if it is to be replaced by something, if it isn't, the country isn't to disintegrate, and is to be replaced by something freer and prosperous and stable and so on and so forth, they would be doing the world a tremendous favour, not just freeing themselves, but also, to an extent, ridding all of us of a regime which has menaced people, not just in their own country, but across the world ever since 1979.
Let's go from one menacing authoritarian regime to another closer to home. We should talk about Keir Starmer and his threats to ban X. Ayatollah Starmer, as you dubbed him in Spiked earlier this week. Brendan, obviously, there's been a big row over Grok, this AI tool that has been, until recently, allowing people to put women in bikinis, allegations that it's even been used to create sexual images of children, which has allowed Starmer to get up on his high horse about X and even threaten a potential ban, saying that Ofcom should use all the powers available to it under the Online Safety Act to bring X and Grok into line. Brendan, we know that this is not the motivation for Starmer's anger with X, is it really?
Not at all. The first thing I want to say is that this Grok stuff is really actually quite disgusting. There is a problem for sure. There's a problem with this kind of digital culture, because if you look at some of these examples, what you will see is, some female writer or activist or just an ordinary woman on the internet who will say something, and then there's these creepy anonymous guys underneath who will say, "Grok, show this woman in a bikini." I mean, it's just really creepy stuff. It's so horrible when you see it. So there is a problem there, and you do wish that Elon Musk would get a tighter handle on that. I don't think it's a free speech issue if Elon Musk wants to decide that Grok can't do certain things, because it will just, ruin the X experience for lots of people. But when it comes to Starmer, he's so obviously exploiting this one issue to clamp down on a social media platform that causes him a lot of bother. There is a lot of anti-Starmer sentiment on there. Some of it comes from Elon Musk and Elon Musk's followers, right back to the resuscitation of the grooming gang scandal last year, to other issues, the immigration crisis. That's the platform on which Keir Starmer gets a lot of flack. He often gets community notes attached to his kind of comments where ordinary people are correcting him for things that he's got wrong. So he hates all that. But people like Starmer and others on the kind of supposedly progressive left, they had no problem when it was Twitter and when people were when it was similarly full of crazy stuff. So, for example, women were being banned for life from Twitter for correctly saying he about men who claim to be women, or for calling people perverts because they wanted to have their bollocks waxed by female, beauticians. And all these kinds of scandals went on for years and years. Similarly horrible stuff, similarly sexist stuff. And of course, the so-called progressives had no problem with that at all, because it was censorship or it was weirdness on their side. So I just think it's so obvious that Starmer is affronted by the existence of this mass platform through which ordinary people, plebs, people he would consider to be gammon and right-wingers and extremists, they can take him to task. They can hold him to account. That's what's really riling him. And that's why he has this incredibly authoritarian instinct to potentially shut down a whole platform. So we should have no truck with that whatsoever.
Yeah, and Tom, it is worth stressing that would bring the UK in line with North Korea, China, Russia, not exactly known as liberal democratic countries, I think it's fair to say.
No,
and this is from Starmer, Mr. Human Rights.
Yeah. I know, it's not nothing to ban one of the biggest social media platforms from your territory, which is why no one outside of the countries that you've mentioned have done it. Brazil did it for a short period of time, which was outrageous after Musk climbed down over what they wanted him to do. It ceased. But still, this is not a company that you really want to keep. And it's so obvious that this is not about safeguarding children or making the user experience on X appropriate for women or clamping down on activity online, which is kind of uncontroversially illegal.
Yeah.
For a couple of simple examples, one of which is if Ofcom was going to open an investigation to anyone because they were concerned about sexual offences online, they would surely open an investigation into Snapchat. And there's certain forms of online kind of child sexual offences, according to police figures, where whenever a platform is recorded in those crimes, almost half of the time it's Snapchat, because that's obviously where a lot of young people hang out. You take something like Blue Sky, sort of the woke alternative to X, kind of Twitter 1.0 in exile in some respects. That is a very well documented problem with death threats. You can really read about this. You know, nothing says be kind like telling a TERF you've got a bullet with a name on it, apparently. But this is what goes on those platforms. And yet there's been no outcry about that whatsoever. No one has discussed it. It is precisely as we've said, because of the fact that, first of all, Elon Musk has been a strident critic of the government. And he's been kind of inflated into a kind of full-blown enemy of the state by this Labour Party. I mean, there was that story earlier this month that the Home Office was stepping up their monitoring of his tweets for fears that they were going to incite unrest and so on and so forth. You don't have to like the kind of quite cranky turn that Elon Musk has taken to recognise that as an absurd overreaction with quite authoritarian consequences, but also because the platform is just freer than it used to be. The powers that be were pretty happy with the big tech firms when they were willing to play ball to censor quote-unquote misinformation or quote-unquote hate speech. But now that you've got this eccentric billionaire who doesn't want to play ball, who does seem to have a genuine conviction that social media needs to be free and open if the digital public square is to mean anything, and they've been panicking about it ever since. So it's so transparent that this isn't about this neat issue. And I think that it's just part and parcel of the kind of periodic panics that establishments have about free speech and democracy. This is just the kind of digitized 21st century version of it, which we've seen playing out.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Brendan. But that is not the end of our conversation. You can join us now over on Spike Podcast Unlocked, where we'll be discussing the banning of Ava Vlodingerbrok, the ineffable wrongness of Rory Stewart, and the potential demise of digital ID. But remember, Spike Podcast Unlocked is only exclusive to Spike supporters. So if you are one, go over there now, go to the Spike website, log in, and you'll see it. But if you're not a Spike supporter, then do sign up. Go to spiked-online.com/support so you can watch the pod. And we've got that special offer on that Tom was talking about, £1 per month for the next 3 months. And we've also got the FSU Free Speech Union event coming up that you'll get a discount to. So do it now, spiked-online.com/support. See you in a moment. Thank you so much for watching the Spike podcast, and thank you to our friends at Private Internet Access for sponsoring us. Now's the time to take control of your digital life and get PIA for 86% off. Click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on screen. And remember, if you're a Spike supporter, then this episode isn't over yet. You can now watch the Spike podcast Unlocked. Just go to the Spike website, log in, and you'll see it on the homepage. So join us right now. See you there. Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.